Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more such history videos and motivational stories.
The conquest of Mexico by the Spaniards. After accomplishing several notable expeditions, the arrival of the Spaniards in Mexico, led by Hernán Cortés, and the eventual conquest of Mexico is considered one of the most astonishing and unbelievable campaigns in history. His success was almost accidental. Had Cortés known that he would face such powerful forces, it is highly likely that he would never have ventured towards Mexico. Instead, he would have preferred to remain in Cuba, enjoying life as one of the richest Spanish settlers. However, Cortés had reasons to believe that Mexico was a developed state with a large and well-trained army. He set sail from Cuba on February 10, 1519. Although his departure was officially sanctioned by the Cuban governor Velázquez, his secret intention was to sever ties with Cuba and assume the governorship of this new land himself, while formally pledging allegiance to the King of Spain. By the time he set out, Governor Velázquez had become aware of Cortés's true intentions, but it was already too late.
Across hundreds of miles of a vast ocean, Emperor Montezuma in Mexico was already aware of Cortés's arrival. His religious texts had warned him in detail about Cortés, even predicting the very moment of his arrival. Montezuma also knew that Cortés would arrive with a small army, and that even a small portion of his own mighty army would be sufficient to defeat the invaders. Yet, despite this knowledge, he trembled in fear. He was shaking from head to toe. To understand why Montezuma trembled so, one must first examine 16th century Mexico and its ruler. The people of Mexico preferred to settle in the volcanic mountain regions of Central America. Several other civilizations, around half a dozen, also existed in this region. Some had vanished entirely, while remnants of others still lingered. However, none of those civilizations possessed the intelligence that was found among the people of Mexico. Through their intellect, the Mexicans had excelled in many fields: the manufacture of weapons, the crafting of beautiful jewelry, the production of fine cotton, and the cultivation of tobacco and chocolate.
They built their capital on an island located in the middle of a lake, approximately 7,000 feet above sea level. It was a city of palaces, accessible by a narrow causeway that could be partially or completely closed off at any moment, and it could be completely destroyed. But it was Mexico's own religion that ultimately led to its downfall and made it possible for a few adventurers to overpower such a vast empire. This religion was of a strange and cruel nature. It was polytheistic, with many gods, and if these gods were not regularly pleased or appeased, the sun would stop rising, the crops would fail, and Mexico would perish. And what kind of offerings did these gods demand? The gift they sought, the offering they demanded, was the human heart. A living, beating heart, ripped from a human chest and presented on the sacrificial altar. The Mexican army was often engaged in wars with neighboring tribes for one key reason: it needed war captives, humans to be sacrificed to their gods. When the time came for sacrifice, these unfortunate war captives were brought one by one to the sacrificial altar. With the help of 5 men, a priest would extract the still beating heart from the victim's chest, and these hearts would be offered to the gods as sacrifice. However, among the gods in the temples of Mexico, there was one deity named Quetzalcoatl, who had, many years ago, been exiled by the other gods because he had refused to accept human sacrifice. The other gods banished him. When he departed in anger in his magical boat, sailing eastward, he declared that he would return one day in the year of the one reed and take his revenge. The one reed year in the Mexican calendar was similar to a leap year in our calendar.
No one paid much attention to Quetzalcoatl's threat until the year 1519 arrived, which was indeed a one-reed year. Emperor Montezuma consulted his scholars and religious texts and came to the terrifying realization that this was the year foretold by the exiled god. Not only that, but the exact day of his return could be predicted. According to the Mexican calendar, the return would occur on what corresponds in our calendar to April 22.
On that very day, April 22, 1519, a man arrived on the shores of Central America who matched the ancient descriptions of Quetzalcoatl. Tall, pale-skinned, with a strange white face, a black beard, and dressed in black robes. Normally, Hernán Cortés did not wear black, but it was Good Friday, and he was dressed accordingly. He arrived with 533 men, along with horses and cannons, aboard 11 ships. Montezuma was paralyzed with fear, convinced this was the returning god. No one could predict what kind of vengeance he might seek. Meanwhile, the people of Mexico continued their worship of other gods, unaware, or perhaps in denial, that resisting Quetzalcoatl would be futile. Quetzalcoatl had landed. Montezuma's spies had already informed him of this terrifying reality. Deeply disturbed, the emperor sent a welcome delegation toward the coast to meet the newcomers. Among them was a giant, majestic, and corpulent man of great presence.
Cortés had previously assumed that the large, majestic man was likely the leader of the welcome delegation. This man was so well fed and regal because, for several days, he had been fattened up, possibly in anticipation that the god Quetzalcoatl might accept him as a sacrificial offering. Although there had been a time when the god had rejected human sacrifice, that was long ago, and it was entirely possible that he had since changed his mind. When Cortés realized the truth behind this, he politely refused the man, but was also disturbed by the implication. Due to Cortés' kind treatment, the man became his loyal and unpaid servant. Cortés provided the local man with fruit and other food supplies. Now, Emperor Montezuma was more convinced than ever that the visitor was indeed the god Quetzalcoatl. His only hope was to offer precious gifts to the god and persuade him to take the long road into the mountains, presumably to return from where he had come.
When Cortés received this message, he responded clearly, though gently, that he absolutely wished to visit the capital and meet the great Emperor Montezuma. In truth, he needed time to establish a secure base on the coast. He named the place Veracruz, and on August 15th, he began his journey toward the capital. Cortés and his companions were showered with gifts along the way, including young women. Among them was a woman named La Malinche, or Malintzin, who not only spoke Mayan, a key indigenous language, but also the language of the Mexica, Nahuatl. Her ability to speak both languages made it easier for Cortés to maintain communication during the journey. Within a week, he encountered a fierce tribe named the Tlaxcalans, who were enemies of the Mexica. This tribe launched an attack on Cortés's 400 men, as some had been left behind at the coast. The attackers numbered about 6,000. Using superior tactics and the terrifying appearance of horses, animals never before seen in Central America, along with the firepower of his small force, Cortés defeated the Tlaxcalans. Only 14 of his men were wounded and 1 killed. The defeated Tlaxcalans soon surrendered and became allies of Cortés. When Emperor Montezuma heard this, he was struck with terror. He sent more emissaries bearing even more gold, rare gems, and fine cotton, along with a desperate plea that Cortés would be provided anything he needed, but the god must now return to where he had come from. But Cortés refused. The invaders continued advancing. A few days later, they reached the lake. They walked along a 5-mile causeway leading to the island, the site
of Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Mexica Empire. Halfway along the causeway, they learned that the emperor himself was coming to greet them. After traveling one more mile, Cortés finally came face to face with Montezuma, who had come out personally to welcome him. The true emperor had now come to meet the so-called God.
The meeting of the God and the emperor. As per royal custom, the emperor was riding on his ceremonial transport, but upon seeing Cortés, he ordered it to stop so that he could walk on foot to greet the God. His attendants obeyed the order, laid carpets beneath his feet, and the emperor advanced toward Cortés. Cortés later wrote, "As we approached one another, I dismounted and was about to embrace the emperor, but two of his attendants stopped me so that I could not touch him." The guest was believed to be a god, and even a god was not permitted to touch the emperor of Mexico. The two exchanged greetings, and Doña Marina, La Malinche, served as interpreter. The guests were treated with extraordinary generosity. They were showered with valuable gifts and accommodated in such a vast palace that every man received a room of his own. Meanwhile, news arrived that Cortés's men left at the coast had been attacked by the Mexicans. Though the report was true, the attack had occurred due to a misunderstanding, and Emperor Montezuma had been unaware of it. Still, Cortés wanted to assert his power. He summoned the local leaders responsible for the coastal attack to the capital and burned them alive in Mexico City. Emperor Montezuma was forced to witness this horrifying display. Afterward, Cortés told the emperor that he must leave his palace and move into the quarters where the Spaniards were staying. He was allowed to bring his servants and staff, but essentially, he was now a prisoner.
Montezuma and the entire Mexican nation were deeply disturbed by this, but there was no alternative except submission. From this point on, the situation began to change rapidly. Back in Cuba, the governor, angry over Cortés's disobedience, had dispatched a punitive expedition to bring him back. Thus, Cortés was forced to march toward the coast to confront the incoming force. Using bribes, made possible by the great wealth now at his disposal, he managed to persuade most of the enemy troops to join him. However, this campaign forced Cortés to remain away from Mexico City for several weeks. During his absence, the situation deteriorated day by day. A battle broke out between the Spaniards left behind and the Mexican army, which sought to free their emperor from captivity. Cortés returned just in time to engage in full combat. Emperor Montezuma was still his prisoner. Cortés asked him to appear at a palace window and urge his people to stop the siege. When Montezuma appeared at the window, a deep silence fell over the crowd. Some Mexicans even began to weep. Suddenly, a stone was hurled from somewhere in the crowd. Montezuma bent down just in time, otherwise he would have been severely injured. Cortés then made the decision to retreat from the city, taking his men back the way they had come, along the narrow causeway leading out of the capital.
Cortés decided to retreat, using the same narrow road by which he had entered the capital. However, the Mexicans had already anticipated his plan, and so they destroyed the bridges along the way. Still, Cortés somehow managed to escape from the capital. Some of his companions succeeded in escaping with him, but those who couldn't make it out were captured and sacrificed. Their hearts were ripped from their living bodies and offered to the gods. The next day, from 5 miles away, Cortés could still hear the heart-wrenching screams of his comrades. The Spaniards, battered and in agony, slowly made their way toward the coast. They passed through the territory of the Tlaxcalans, who had previously become their allies. The Tlaxcalans once again came to their aid. In fact, it was this tribe that made the conquest of Mexico possible. They urged the Spaniards to remain with them for as long as they wished and insisted that before returning they must conquer Mexico, this time with the full force of Tlaxcalan's support.
Cortés could hardly believe his luck. In truth, he had already taken Mexico without firing a single bullet, but due to his own mistakes, he had lost it. Now, however, the Tlaxcalans were offering him their full support. At the same time, a smallpox epidemic broke out in Mexico, wiping out more than half of the defending population. The Mexicans were unfamiliar with the disease, which had been brought by the Spaniards. Fate now favored Cortés. The foolish Governor Velázquez, who had sent a force to bring Cortés back, continued to send ship after ship as reinforcements. But that force had already joined Cortés. So all the supplies, weapons, and troops arriving on those ships now fell into Cortés' hands. Fully armed and supported by hundreds of thousands of Tlaxcalan allies, Cortés was now ready for a decisive assault.
In August 1521, Mexico was conquered. Cortés assumed control of the region on behalf of the King of Spain, and Christianity was introduced. To the people, Cortés was Quetzalcoatl, the god who had once been exiled and had now returned to conquer Mexico. How could they possibly refuse his religion? This is why Christianity spread so swiftly throughout the region. Even today, in some remote parts of Mexico, there are farmers who worship both the Holy Trinity and the god Quetzalcoatl.